Good morning. All right. I was kind of wondering how that video was going to go if somebody asked, do people really matter? And somebody said, nah. Like, so. But good morning. My name's Dan. I'm one of the elders here at SCC, and I'm excited to be closing out the series, Real Answers for Unreal Questions, and I've chosen to answer this question: do people and their stories really matter? Because I'm a storyteller at heart, and I've written a story that I want to share with you today as part of the message, and we'll get into that as we go along. But the story's called the Table, and it's based on John chapter 12. That's where Jesus is reclining at a table with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and the story kind of envisions what type of people might be seated around the table with him. So we'll get into that in a few minutes. But so we're asking the question: do people and their stories really matter? And it's kind of a summary question to our series, because the answers to all these questions impact real people. So Lisa and I meet a lot of amazing people, and I want to share their stories, and that's what I'll do this morning. But first, I just want to say, honestly, this series has been really great. I've actually listened to most of them 2 or 3 times. I probably won't re-listen to mine because, I don't know if you've ever heard my voice, but I sound really weird when I'm recorded. So probably won't listen to mine again. But I've listened to most of them 2 or 3 times because I really want to capture the language about the wells and the fences and drawing close to the source. And so I really think this series is kind of is proving to be a useful tool going forward, something we can refer back to on these unreal questions, these hard questions, and be able to use it as a tool later on as we meet people, interact with people, and they ask questions. So since we've been on asking unreal questions, I want to start with a question of my own. And you'll see at the top of your bulletin, there's a yes and a no. And when I ask you the question, I want you to circle whatever answer pops into your mind first. Just yes or no, and don't hesitate, don't overthink it, just circle the first thing that pops into your head. Now, fair warning, this is a very loaded question. But I don't want you to overthink it. Just answer it, just circle it. First thing that comes into your mind. You ready? Ready? Well, even if you weren't ready, I was still going to ask the question. But we got to keep it moving, you know. Okay, here's the question. Would you really want to sit next to a serial killer in heaven? Now just circle the answer. Now, some of us had an initial thought, and then your Sunday school politeness kicked in, and maybe you changed your answer. Right? But the point is, that's kind of an unreal question, and the implication of either answer really goes far beyond what we're capable of deciding successfully on our own. Like if I said yes, what does that say about the kind of people I'm comfortable with? What does that say about the kind of people I'm okay being with? Maybe the kind of person I am. And that's what I love about church. You never know what kind of weirdo is sitting next to you. Like, for example, the other night I was sitting at a table with a bunch of church guys, and it was revealed that one of them was a Buckeye fan. Now, I didn't really see the big deal, but apparently it was. Because the other 3 guys, they spent a good portion of the evening explaining to the Buckeye fan why this was bad. Like that he shouldn't be a Buckeye fan. Like, this isn't allowed. Like, we don't do that here. Now, I was getting a little nervous because I don't watch a ton of TV, and I'd never seen the show they were talking about. So I just said, I'm really more of a Star Wars guy. But you never know what kind of people you're sitting next to. They could be a Trekkie. But if I say no, I don't really want to sit next to a serial killer in heaven, what does that say about my understanding of the gospel? Now, if I were a serial killer myself, I'd be fine with it. Sure, have a seat. You know? But if I was the victim, not so much. But what does our answer to that question say about how we understand the nature and character of God? About his love and his justice, his fairness, his grace? So we've been asking unreal questions, like hard questions that don't have easy answers. And the implications are far beyond what we're able to navigate on our own. Such as, is culture really that bad? Is marriage really worth it? Does God really care who I sleep with? Is Christianity really different? Is gender really a divine design? Does parenting really matter? Does a loving God really send people to hell? Now, I like the repetition of the word really throughout this series. Then it kind of reminds me of a question in Genesis 3:1. When the serpent said to Eve, did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Did God really say that? It's almost as if right from the beginning, rather than drawing close to the well, people seem to want to run out to the edges of the fences and see how far we could get away from the well without going too far. Did God really say that? Just like the circle Pastor Ben drew last week, the circle represents what's within God's best for us and God's design for us. But instead of staying right in the center of the circle, we kind of press out towards the edges just to see what we can get away with. And when we ask these questions, we kind of know the answers. We kind of know the answers to some of these questions. We kind of know God's best, God's design. But we also kind of want to just see what we can get away with. Like, do people really matter enough that I'm not going to shy away from the hard answers to these questions? Pastor Nate asked, do I get it, and do I care enough to get it? Do we care enough? Do people really matter enough for us to get the answers to these questions right? Do I care enough to stay close enough to the well, to the source, to the design, to the empowerment that God offers, so that I have something to offer people around me? Or do I put up the fences? Do I put up the fences because I'm nervous, because I don't know the answers to the really hard questions? Because the answers to these questions impact people. Let me read that list again, and as I read the list, just listen and hear and see if you know anyone that topic impacts. When we talk about culture, when we talk about marriage, when we talk about sex and gender and religion and parenting and hell, do you know anyone that's impacted by those topics? We all do. And we hurt people when we have bad answers to these questions. Pastor Nate said, when we don't know how to answer these questions, we become overly dogmatic in ways we shouldn't, or we become quiet in places where we shouldn't. And this is why people call Christians judgmental. This is why people call Christians outdated, because they talk too loud on some things and not clear enough on other things. That means out of fear, I put fences in places that I shouldn't, and I don't invite people to draw near to the well. Instead, I keep people away. I protect the well, I defend the well. My arbitrary answers and standards keep people out instead of drawing people in. And then I think I'm doing God a favor because I'm defending the well, I'm protecting the gospel, and I'm fighting for the faith. And then I treat people like the enemy, even though people are never the enemy. Right? People are never the enemy. That's the first fill in the blank on your bulletin. People are never the enemy. Ephesians 6:12 says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces. And again, the question is, do I really believe that? Do I really believe that people matter? And do I really believe that people matter to me? So I want to talk for a minute, like we've been doing, I want to talk about what culture says on this subject. But specifically, I want to talk about what Christian or religious culture or church culture says on the subject. Do people really matter? So religious culture tells us that Jews and Samaritans don't associate. That the religious and the non-religious don't associate. That's John chapter 4. We don't associate with folks from the other church. We don't do life from them, with them. Christian or church culture also says that if he only knew what kind of woman she is, she's a sinner, and he wouldn't let her touch him. We don't even get involved with them. We don't let them get too close. Church culture says about the woman caught in the act of adultery, the law says stone her. What do you say? Well, we want to get rid of her. We want to get rid of the problem as fast as possible so we don't have to see the problem. We want to cover it up. We want to get rid of her. Christian culture says about the tax collector begging God for mercy. Remember when the Pharisee went to pray and he prayed, and he looked down at the tax collector who was crying out to heaven, and he just basically said, thank God I'm not like him. Thank God I'm not as bad as those people. Remember when the disciples were trying to keep the kids away? They were saying, Jesus doesn't have time for them. Jesus doesn't have time for you. Church culture makes it harder for people to enter in. That we need to keep them out, that they have to earn their way in. We picked that up in Acts chapter 15. It got so bad that they had to call a church council to speak on the issue and basically say, stop making it harder for people to come to faith. Church culture says, why would you sit with tax collectors and sinners? Why would you want to be around them? In the parable of the lost son, the elder brother refused to associate with the son that returned. He called him this son of yours. He was just so condescending and so belittling to his father and to his brother. And this is what church culture, this is what Christian culture says about people. But what does Jesus say about people? Do people matter to Jesus? See, when they said this man welcomes sinners and eats with them, they were saying it as an insult. They were outraged that Jesus was doing that. Why do these people matter to Jesus? So I think the story that I wrote, that I'm going to share with you, kind of answers this question. And as I read this story, I want you to keep in mind this story is based on people that Lisa and I have actually met. But the story is a composite, meaning some of it's true, some of it's combined with other stories to kind of simplify it, and some of it's completely made up to kind of flesh out the story. So if you think, hey, that kind of sounds like me, well, you're probably right. And if you're thinking, well, that kind of sounds like me, but I don't remember that part, that's because I made that part up to make the story sound better, because you're not that interesting. Oh, you're so vain, you probably think this story's about you. So, if you feel called out or attacked or made fun of, yeah, that's probably the case too. So maybe you'll recognize someone in the story, maybe not. But the main thing is I want the people who hear this story later on to feel like that their story has been heard, that their story is important, that they matter. And I hope this story helps. So here's the story. I'm just going to read through it. The scene is the meal after Lazarus has been raised from the dead, and Mary anointed Jesus' feet with the expensive perfume. It's in John chapter 12. So a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. So I walked into the dining room. A little bit late, but I didn't think anyone noticed. Dinner had already started, and the room smelled like perfume. Mary seemed like she'd been crying. She slid over and motioned for me to sit. It was kind of weird, I thought. So I sat down and I began to look around the table, curious to see who else was reclining at the table with Jesus. Now, Lazarus was at the table. I had heard he'd been sick, but he was actually looking pretty good. The other church people were there as well. Mary, of course, was there, and Martha, her sister. And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, was there, and they were busy doing church things. They were serving and worshiping and criticizing. So as I sat there, I thought, who else? I picked up a loaf of bread and began to break off a piece. As I looked around, who else? Who's near Jesus? Who's welcome to be there? Who's invited? Who's comfortable? Who's at ease, reclining at the table? Right next to Jesus was a guy who didn't really know who Jesus was, but he always kind of reminded me a little bit of Jesus. He seemed to know how to genuinely love people, how to build his community, and to care for those around him. He was generous with hugs and fist bumps. He called everyone bro. He always had a few dollars for the fundraisers and benefits for the families struck by tragedy, or a word of his advice for his friends when they were acting like idiots. He really knew how to take care of his people. Now, next to him were the local bikers. They had recently sponsored a school supply drive for the kids. That was their thing, supporting the kids. Got to support the kids. They always beamed with pride when they brought it up, and they always brought it up. I was pretty sure that two of the other guys at the table were just out back smoking a minute ago. One was definitely drinking. I could tell because he would look around the table really quick, and then he'd pop in a breath mint. And it didn't help, because now he just smelled like alcohol and mints and cigarette smoke. One young woman stumbled in late. She was kind of green-looking and dazed, maybe a little bit nauseous. Clearly, she had been out the night before, and her bad decisions were evident. Martha helped her adjust her garments back up to help preserve her dignity. She smoothed out her hair a little and said, "Sit right here, sweetie." And Martha pulled out a chair for her. The young woman looked awkward as she tried to act natural, like nothing was unusual, like she actually belonged at the table. And when Judas saw this, he rolled his eyes and kind of half threw his hands up and mouthed the words, "Really? That? Here? Right now?" And Martha, when she brought back a glass of water for the young woman and sat down next to her at the table, she shot Judas a mind-your-own-business glare. Now, next to Judas was the bartender who had just worked the closing shift, and she missed church again because she needed to sleep. She couldn't stay too long at the table. She just wanted a cup of coffee and an aspirin, something to eat before her next shift. She was constantly checking her phone because someone called in again, and she had to cover their shift again. And she was pretty sure that she had a cold coming on. She was also having trouble finding a sitter for her boys. Their father was supposed to take them this weekend, but he didn't. Again. Sitting quietly at one end of the table was that new family. They had just moved into the neighborhood, I think. Not sure how to pronounce any of their names. But now that I think about it, I guess they've been in the neighborhood for a few years. Separated from the new family by an empty chair was a very anxious young man. He was newly married, but his wife wasn't at the table. She was homesick again, cancer. The young man hoped to talk to Jesus after dinner, but he probably wouldn't because he was angry. In the spot next to him was a worried-looking mother. Her daughter was supposed to be at the table for dinner, but she wasn't there yet. They had gotten into a fight last night, and the daughter hadn't been responding to any of her texts. And there was a note that she found on her bed. Oh, and then there was the one guy who only shows up when there's food. He was at the table. He was always there, especially when there was food. And the father who just had to get out of the house, well, he was sitting in his usual spot at the table, and he was mad like usual, and he was rubbing his swelling hand when he thought no one was looking. Next to him was my coworker who, when I asked how he was doing in the morning, he always says, "Well, I'm just hanging in there. Just another day in paradise. Living the dream." Another coworker, he was the one that was currently on disability for a bad back. He was at the table too. And whenever he noticed someone looking his way, he always seemed to be in slightly more pain than he was a minute ago. Now, he always had health advice or pain management advice, and he even had extra pills if you were interested. Of course, nothing ever seemed to work for him. And that rich kid who left his girlfriend because she wouldn't consider other options, he was at the table. It's kind of weird to see him there because I thought he was going to school out of state. He was a good kid. He's the kind that was really going to go places. The church leader who had to step down due to family reasons, what was he doing at the table? He shouldn't be there. And then the younger guy who hates God, he was there. And the reason I knew that he hated God was because it was written on his black heavy metal t-shirt. There was no mistaking what he meant. But if you get to know him, he doesn't really want to talk about hating God. He'd rather talk about music or his cats. Then there was the person that I've said God hates divorce to. He was sitting alone. He wouldn't look at me. He was uncomfortable. Of course, his wife wasn't there. She was long gone, and I just kind of shook my head. Can't believe he couldn't figure out a way to work it out with her. The mother who was on government assistance was there. As usual, she had her big bag of stuff that she always carried, and she also had her extra large to-go soda, and she was puffing on a vape that smelled like artificial peaches. I wasn't sure where her kids were, but I could hear them. A couple that brings their dog with them everywhere. They were at the table. And guess what? They brought their dog. Sitting at the other end of the table, kind of even looking as if he was sitting alone, even in the crowd, was an older man. He was retired, he spent his whole life working, and he lives by himself now. And he always jokes that he's looking for his next ex-wife. And his kids don't visit him very often, and he's always inviting me over to hang out or to have a beer. And he's got a nice place, and he just bought a new grill, and I have to get over there one of these days, but when I'm not too busy, because it's never a short visit with him. And the guy who used to work on my car, he was there. His hands and face always seemed dirty from the dust and the oil, and he always looked tired. He was a good guy. He helped me out a lot when I was younger. He wouldn't cash my check until payday, and he always managed to fit me in no matter how swamped he was. I was a little surprised to see him at the table because he was more into politics than he was into church, and he preferred to drink coffee and watch the news on Sundays. That was his thing. Next to him was the couple that I said, love the sinner, hate the sin about. Now, there were others at the table, ones that I didn't know very well, but they were the ones that I've protested against, ones that I took a stand against, told the truth in love, or unfriended, or condemned, or judged them. They were all there, and they were reclining at the table with Jesus. And they were welcome, and they were eating with him. As I looked at them at ease near Jesus, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, and I turned and I saw Jesus smiling, just kind of big in my face. And he said, hey. I leaned in to hear what he had to say. And motioning to the loaf of bread, Jesus asked, could you pass that along? You're holding everyone up. Come on, let's pass it along. Keep it going. Oh, right, I said. I was flustered, and I fumbled the bread, and I started to pass it. And Mary hollered, yeah, hurry up, pass it, I'm hungry. And she playfully poked me in the ribs. And tears still stained her cheeks, but you could tell she'd been smiling for a little while now. And my face burned red, and I was just like, oh. I mumbled a little bit, and I broke off a piece of bread, and I passed the loaf to Jesus, not making eye contact with Jesus. And Jesus passed the bread on to the guy who didn't really know him, and Jesus just kind of laughed and patted me on the back and said, it's all right, friend. I'm just glad you're here. I looked around the table, and everyone else was laughing and smiling too, and they all seemed to be having fun, and they were all just reclining and at ease and welcome. I knew I was missing something. I felt like I didn't belong at the table. I was suddenly too hot. I was embarrassed. I thought, this is ridiculous. I started to get up to excuse myself. And again, I felt the hand on my shoulder. I looked at Jesus, and I saw his pleading eyes, and he said, please stay. Please stay. You're always welcome at the table. Luke 15:2 says, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Hopefully you heard one or more stories that resonates with you. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you know. Maybe you noticed how each of these people is asking one or more of these questions in our series. So I have a couple more stories to share with you. One guy, Lisa and I met by mistake. He thought he recognized us, but he didn't. Like, he'd come up and it was like, I don't know you. But he thought he did. So we figured that out, and then we introduced ourselves anyway, and we asked him how he was. Like, how you doing? And he said, my girlfriend told me to get out of the house. I said, well, why is that? Well, see, it turned out he had been married for 32 years. He played guitar. His wife played bass. She had passed away 3 years ago from cancer. So he just had to get out of the house. So we invited him to sit at our table for a few minutes and share his story, and we just listened to him, and then he just kind of wandered off. Another time, we sat at a table next to a local in a town about an hour south of Sparta. And just got small talk, how you doing, where you from, and just so happened that he'd lived in Sparta about 20 years ago. And he remembered a certain Baptist church in Sparta that opened their doors for his friend's funeral years ago. And I said, Sparta Baptist Church? He said, yeah. I go, I never heard of them. No. Another time I was pretending to watch basketball while Lisa was talking to a couple. And the conversation shifted to music, so I kind of got dragged in. But moments later, the couple was in tears. And the husband, who should have been retired by now, he was still working to support their child as their child wrestled with gender dysphoria and transition surgeries. I was just trying to watch basketball. Another time we met a kid who was a liar and a thief, and he affected someone we know personally in a very cruel way. But we didn't know that until after we started talking to him. And this kid was desperate. He had a new daughter and he wanted to do things right. And so he had reached out to some Mormon missionaries online, and they met up and they were having dinner at the same place we were. So after the Mormon missionaries left, we were like, hey, what's going on? Let's hear your story. And we were able to share the love and forgiveness of Jesus before I figured out who he was. Lisa figured it out before I did, but it was too late. I had already shared with him about the unconditional forgiveness of Jesus, and I couldn't take it back. This all happened in Sparta or related to Sparta. It's not like you have to go very far. It's not like you have to ask unreal questions. Sometimes we don't even have to ask a hard question. We just have to ask, how you doing? One of my friends, and I have a slide for this one. One of my friends featured in the story wears a T-shirt that says, I'm okay. You guys got that? It says, I'm okay. But if you look at it close enough, the darker letters next to okay, it actually says, I'm broken. Do you think she's trying to tell us something? Psalm 34:18 says that the Lord is close to the okay-hearted. So do people really matter? See, the people in the story are all people that church culture writes off. The people that make us uncomfortable when they show up at church. Because we're afraid, because we're not supposed to associate with those kinds of people. Because we don't have good enough answers for these unreal questions. Because we ourselves are too far from the well. Or because we put up a fence to keep them away from the well, and we, like the Pharisees, say, thank God I'm not like those people. Thank God I'm not like one of them. Or because we put up a fence to keep them away from the well. See, lots of people don't believe that God is for them because the people who believe in God haven't been for them. That's the next fill in your blank on the bulletin. People don't believe that God is for them because people who believe in God haven't been for them. Maybe that's why people don't want to come to church. See, here's the thing. You, we, me, we're the source. Jesus said, whoever believes in me, rivers of living water will flow from within. See, we're the well. And where should the wells be? The wells should be where there's no water. It doesn't make sense to build a well next to a lake, or build a well next to a waterfall, or next to another well. To be useful and helpful and relevant, wells need to be in the desert, in the wilderness, in the dry places, the desolate places, the hard places, the dirty places. In some places, the issue isn't water. The issue is clean water. It's living water. Living water is relevant and important in dirty places. This is why Jesus said, go into all the world. This is why our feet should be fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. So we can go, because they're not coming. My friend who says she's okay, she's not coming to church because she works too late on Saturday and too early on Sunday. She's not coming. And others aren't coming because the fences are too tall, or there's too many, or it's too confusing to get to the well. Or they're not coming because sometimes the well is too far away, because they've pushed the limit and they ended up farther away than they ever imagined, away from the well, and they can't get back. So what do I do about that when it's their own fault that they got too far away from the well? Because sometimes people do that, right? They walk away from the well and they end up too far and they can't get back. So do I just leave them there? Do I put up a fence so I don't have to see them out there? So I don't have to be uncomfortable, so I don't have to associate, so I can just get rid of them as fast as possible? What did Jesus do? In John chapter 4, Jesus had to go through Samaria. Check out verse 4. It says, "Now Jesus had to go through Samaria. He came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his own son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus was tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to him to draw out water, Jesus said to her, 'Will you give me a drink?' His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan said, 'You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?' For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." So Jesus had to go through Samaria. The word in the King James Version of the Bible is must needs. Jesus needed to go through Samaria. Like he really had to. He really had to, because there was a woman there that nobody cared about. Because if they cared about her, they would have invited her to the well when the rest of them were going to the well. She would have been with them instead of alone at the worst possible time to be hauling water. And then the religious folks didn't associate with her either. She was more than willing to talk about religion. As you know, if you read the rest of the story, she knew a lot about religion, but nobody wanted to be with her. They didn't associate with her. There was no one to talk about religion with, to go to church with. She was alone, and she was sitting next to a well. But it was also the wrong well. It was a well that would only make her thirsty again. So Jesus had to go. He needed to go to her. Because she wasn't coming to him. Because she had been taught that this was the well that she had to draw from. This was the only well she could draw from. Culture taught her that, because none of the people in town wanted to associate from her, so they told her when she could draw from the well and said this was it. And religion taught her this was the only spot, this was the only well that she could be at. She wasn't invited anywhere else. So Jesus, the source, the living water, went to her. And he allowed her something that no one else allowed her. He allowed her to be important to him. He was thirsty, and he asked for a drink. Now, we all know this wasn't about water. It was about value. Jesus says to me, "You're very important. Right now you matter. You have value to me. You matter to me." So Pastor Nate showed us a Greek word a few weeks back, prosdekomai. See, I can read big words too, not just Nate. It means to receive with excitement, to welcome. This is the word that they used in Luke 15:2 when it says, "Now tax collectors and sinners were all gathering to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law uttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" That's that word, to receive them with excitement. Not only were they invited, Jesus was excited that they were there. They were wanted, they were noticed, they were valued. So how do we do that? How do we receive people with excitement? How do we welcome them to the table? How do we invite them to the well? Well, you've heard Pastor Nate say this a few years back, at least 4 years ago, but it's stuck with me. And he said, we need to listen, learn, and lament. And since I first heard that, I added one more to that, the word let. So listen, learn, lament, and let. So we need to listen. So I had a guy one time tell me, well, really, I guess he kind of shouted it at me. He shouted how much he hates Christians, that there's no difference between Allah and Buddha and Jesus. It's all the same nonsense. He shouted that he hates Catholics, he hates Baptists, and he hates preachers. And he looks at me and he says, "And you're what?" I'm a Baptist preacher. and he said, oh, he goes, oh, well, you're cool. He looked at Lisa and I and he said, you're different. But then he went on to tell me how arrogant and combative Christians were. And he's kind of shouting all this at me. And he only let me get 4 words in. So I had to make them count, 4 words. I said, as he's telling me Christians are arrogant and combative and you're this and you're that, the 4 words that I could get in were, I agree and I'm sorry. That's the next fill in the blank on your bulletin there. I agree and I'm sorry. See, we Christians, we have the greatest offer in history. Remember what makes Christianity different is that God came down to us to forgive our sins. We didn't have to earn it. We're saved by grace, and somehow that has made us arrogant and combative because our posture is that we feel we need to protect the well. That by inviting people to the well, that inviting them to the table, that somehow we stand to lose when we do this. And so we become combative and arrogant and defensive. What else could I say to him? I just agreed with him. I didn't defend the well. I just listened. And I didn't lose anything. I gained a friend. And he usually hugs me when I run into him now. See, he welcomed me in because I listened to what he had to say. So we listen, we learn. See, when we listen well, we can learn. We can learn what's really on people's mind. We can learn their stories. We can learn what's important to them. We can learn what they're excited about. And Lisa's really good at this because she listens well and she asks good questions. And she learns about people's families and their jobs and their pets. She asks about their tattoos. There's always a story when there's a tattoo, so ask about it. You'll hear a story. And it matters what's on their mind. So when Lisa asks, how are you doing, the next time she sees an individual, they know that she's genuinely interested in them. People love telling their stories. And Christians should love to listen because every person is God's story. Every person is God's poem that he's writing. And when we listen well, we learn how to love them well. And we learn our part in their story. So listen, learn, and lament. Be happy when people are happy, but also be sad when people are sad. Jesus was a man of sorrows. He was familiar with grief. We need to get familiar with grief. Seriously, we need to take a walk around town. And grieve the houses that you know are drug houses. Grieve the houses where you know kids are being abused. Grieve their stories and pray. Acknowledge how hard life is, how stressful family stuff is, how annoying work can be. Agree that life isn't easy or fair. Just lament, grieve with them. Be familiar with their sorrows. So listen, learn, lament, and then let. This one's so important. This is where we can give up. We can put down our swords and not be so combative and not be so arrogant as when we just let. See, I don't get to define someone else's experience. I don't get to describe someone else's struggle. I don't get to tell someone how they're supposed to feel. I don't get to minimize or maximize their experience. I lose nothing by letting someone define their own experience. I only gain. I learn how to love them better if I let them define their experience. If I let them talk, if I let them be mad, if I let them hurt, if I let them be wrong. Yes, we can do that. We can let people be wrong. In politics, in sports, in movies, we can let people be wrong. We don't have to fix everything. If we let someone be wrong, then we can learn how to help. We lose nothing. We don't have to protect the well. We have to let people in. You heard Pastor Ben say it a bunch in this series. Drop your sword. Drop your sword. We don't have to protect the well. We have to make space at the well. If you're going to fight, fight for people, not against them. People are never the enemy. Make space at the table. So a couple of questions I want to leave with you for your own reflection. If I claim to know God's design and God's best, does that make me more hostile or more helpful? If I believe that I have the right answers, does that make me more confrontational or more compassionate? If I've experienced the benefits of being close to the well, am I more inviting or more imposing? And ask yourself, who is welcome at my table? And ask, where can I go that needs a well? those dry places, the hard places, the dirty places. Where can I go that needs a well? But most importantly, ask yourself, how close to the well am I? See, we need to be so close to the source and let it permeate our lives as we grow in the grace and knowledge of God. See, God is so appealing. We just have to showcase him. Jesus said, just let your light shine before all so that when they see your light, they'll glorify God. Because it's God that's the source, and it's his design, it's his best. Those are the real answers to the unreal questions. So if you need to draw close to the well today, I just want to invite you to take some time and pray about that. Come talk to one of us, Pastor Ben or Josh or myself. If you need to come back to the well, you're invited back. And if you've never been invited to the well, first off, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you've never been invited. But also I want you to know today that you're invited. If today you need to know Jesus as your Savior, you're invited to draw close. Again, just feel free to come talk to Pastor Ben or myself or Josh. Amen? Amen. God, we thank you. We thank you that you are the source, you're the design, you're the best. Please help us to draw close to you and to invite others to draw close to you. In Jesus' name.